For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of 1,000,000 worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass, writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day so that he may truly never die. Yet in his deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Mighty battle fleets cross the demon-infested miasma of the warp, the only route between distant stars, their way lit by the Astronomicon, the shining psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will. Vast armies give battle in his name on uncounted worlds. Greatest among his soldiers are the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, bioengineered super warriors. Their comrades in arms are Legion, the Imperial Guard, the ever-vigilant Inquisition, and the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, to name but a few. But for all their multitudes, they are barely enough to hold off the ever-present threat from aliens, heretics, mutants, and worse. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. These are the opening words you read when opening the Dark Heresy's 2nd edition book for the first time, including quotes that are well known among the Warhammer 40k community. It's especially poignant at the beginning of this book, as it sets an ominous stage for the table, and it lets you know exactly the nightmare you're walking into. Hey there, party people. It's your boy Archlich, but you can just call me Archie, and today we're talking about something that I've been looking forward to covering for quite some time. Today we're talking about Warhammer 40k. Now I know that there's plenty of lore tubers out there, combing the depths of the autistic spectrum to bring you only the finest records that the Administratum has to offer. They do their job much better than I could ever hope to. However, I come here to talk about something a little different. The year is 2008. Middle schoolers are slamming Mountain Dew and using all of the foulest words of power known to the realms of men in Halo 3 lobbies. A little-known group early in the year known as Black Industries, a role-playing games branch of Games Workshop's publishing arm, Black Library Publishing, came out with a tabletop role-playing game titled Dark Heresy. It's a game set in the new popular sci-fi fantasy setting and unofficial international foundation for protecting virginity, Warhammer 40,000. Black Industries would get shut down by the Brexit geezers running GW shortly after their mantle would be picked up by the publisher Fantasy Flight Games. Each year they would go on to release a new campaign setting, with Rogue Trader in 2009 centered around being greedy murder hobos, Deathwatch in 2010, which would let your players get in to take a crack at being Space Marines, Black Crusade in 2011 for all you disgusting freaks who fancied the idea of playing a deranged psychopath trying not to get turned into a chaos spawn while competing to impress your interdimensional sugar daddies, and Only War in 2012 for all of you overused shovel meme enjoyers and people who play too much Hearts of Iron. All of these publications were part of an overarching game system simply titled Warhammer 40,000 Roleplay. While each was designed to be played individually with just one of the books, they all actually used the same system more or less, which meant that you could play characters across game systems if you so desired, although the XP adjustments were required to balance things out. Fast forward to 2016, and Fantasy Flight Games announces it's officially ending its support for any of their Games Workshop's titles, and all their commensurate products will be promptly removed from their different marketplaces as a result of losing their licensing rights. In 2018, the license was acquired and a new system known as Wrath and Glory became the new front-facing role-playing game for the franchise. Now, I've never played Wrath and Glory, and honestly, I don't really have a mind to. From what I hear, it's a very simplified and dumbed-down version of the previous games. Well, I definitely understand the appeal of that. The thought of it kind of ruins some of the magic of these games for me. However, we're not here to talk about Wrath and Glory. Nowadays, you can only find traces of these games on secondhand markets or by navigating some less than reputable spaces on the internet. Despite being discontinued, I really wanted to take some time to talk about these old games, as the Warhammer 40,000 roleplay series released by FFG is probably my favorite RPG of all time. So, dear acolytes, if you'll humor me for a few moments of your time, please grab a snack, get comfy, and let me tell you about the Warhammer 40,000 RPGs you never heard of. The Fantasy Flight Games Warhammer 40,000 roleplay system is a D100-based percentile system of play, meaning that depending on circumstances and what a character is good at, you'll roll with percentage chances of success in order to determine the outcome of a situation or course of action. Your characters vary in ability based on a plethora of different factors such as their classes, their backgrounds, their racial options depending upon the book, and experience. As your players rack up more experience, they can acquire different talents, skills, and characteristic advances to help further specialize their characters, either to round them out or to specialize their abilities even further. There are 4 main building blocks to the character building process that really drive this system on the player side: characteristics, talents, skills, and traits. Characteristics represent your PC's basic abilities, and they set the base DCs for the checks you roll in the game. An interesting part about this system is that your character's stats actually set the DCs for a roll, and the GM only modifies the target based off of the challenge involved. For example, let's say you're playing Grug the Ogren. Grug has a weapon skill of 45. If Grug decides to try and cave in someone's skull with his Ripper gun, he'll need to roll a D100 against that 45, along with modifiers. If he rolls lower than the 45 plus modifiers, he succeeds in hitting them. Otherwise, he misses. There are degrees of success as well that affect rolls and outcomes based off of certain talents as well, but we don't need to worry about those for now. Speaking of talents, let's talk about the second building block of characters in this game. These are more specific abilities that are given an XP cost to purchase, as long as you meet the prereqs to take them. These are the bread and butter for defining the special things that your character can do. While there are some base actions you can take in the game, of course, the talents are what allow you to really do most of your special stuff. For example, there's one that allows you to make long-range shots without penalties. There are some that allow you to do special social actions. There's those that make you better at dual-wielding weapons, and many others. What about skills? Skills simply add a bonus to your rolls pertaining to a specific skill that your character possesses. They range from you being untrained in a skill and having a penalty to all checks using it, all the way to you having a plus 30 to a skill that you've maxed out. Lastly, there's traits. Traits are bonuses or effects that are brought about by the type of being you are or physical traits your character has. Normally these aren't changed much as you go through the game, although they can be. A simple example of a trait would be your character's size, which affects a whole mess of different things like your speed and how easy you are to hit. Regardless, this is all to say that the amount of customization and options in this game is truly staggering, and you can build characters of the same class with radically different styles of play based off of the mixing and matching of these XP-purchased advancements. Notably, some of these systems allow for a little more customization than others, mind you. Dark Heresy and Black Crusade, for example, allow for PCs to pick from the entire talent list as long as they meet the prereqs for it, while Rogue Trader lists out what talents or traits you can pick up based off of the class that you choose at the beginning of play. Each book has a kind of different way of handling it in their own way, but it's malleable enough to make work between systems if you want to mix and match your characters. The choices are practically endless in this game, and they made sure to make plenty of add-ons for options of play. For example, they released an expansion for Dark Heresy that allows your players to play as Grey Knights of the Ordo Malleus, and they made tons of expansions to play different types of heretics in Black Crusade, among other expansions. In fact, if there's any criticism I'd like to throw at the games, is that they might be a little too endless. There's practically a mechanic for almost every fucking thing in this game, from downtime to in-depth ship combat that has multiple different sub-mechanics, and entire separate systems designed to handle only specific weapon systems or add-ons that a ship may have, acquiring new items, chaos favor mechanics, insanity, mutations, land vehicles, air vehicles, and many more. This system is crunchier than uncooked popcorn. There are just too many fucking rules that it can sometimes feel daunting to approach it. Even I find myself tossing out many of the systems because they're just so fucking tedious. And you'll find this tediousness leaks into damn near everything. Just wait until you have to start getting stats together for your NPC enemies. It gets ridiculous, to say the least. But if you can get over the tedium and wrap your head around the system, I think you then start to find a super rewarding game with a ton of fun to offer and nearly endless paths you can take with both your character's fluff and crunch in a setting that we don't often get to explore in roleplay. Now that you know a little bit about the game system and some minor details about the actual mechanics said system is built around, let's get more into the subjective bit. How does it play? Well, that's a bit of a complicated answer, as it really depends on the specific type of setting that you're using. Some games like Deathwatch and Only War are going to be much more combat-oriented, as they focus on being members of a military unit and accomplishing combat missions given to your team, while games like Dark Heresy and Black Crusade are much more likely to have a lot more intrigue and politicking that builds up to everyone killing the shit out of each other like they do in 40k. Meanwhile, Rogue Trader is a murder hobo shit show where everyone's going hog wild and trying to commit as many crimes as possible to make that fat cash. You can also do it legitimately in that game, but let's be real here. That ain't gonna happen. Each of the core rulebooks are completely standalone, and you don't need the others to be able to play the game and have fun. So with that in mind, I'm going to cover the first and most popular of the games to be released, Dark Heresy. I would like to cover all of them in this video, but I think I've learned a lesson from my Dragons video I put out, so needless to say, I'll be partitioning this to only cover one of the games in some extra detail. If you all do find this interesting, perhaps I could be persuaded to continue with this series and do a deeper dive into each of the games. However, with all of that being said, let's talk a bit about Dark Heresy. Dark Heresy centers around your players being agents for the Inquisition. They'll all bring their specific set of skills to the table to help contribute to an effective team of investigators that can help bring the filthy heretics of the galaxy to justice, or more likely, an unmarked grave somewhere. There are a ton of different classes to pick from, and they're referred to as roles in this game. The second edition Dark Heresy core rulebook gives us 8 roles, 7 backgrounds, and 6 homeworld origins to choose from. Each of these combine together to create a character with unique traits, abilities, and aptitudes. Your homeworld is pretty self-explanatory, but it's worth mentioning that it does give tangible mechanical benefits to your character, and your background will define what organization or walk of life you come from. The options are pretty comprehensive as far as the Imperium is concerned. You can come from the Adeptus Administratum, which is kind of like the Space IRS, but worse somehow. Their bonuses are pretty helpful for anyone trying to make a social or knowledge-based character. The Chads among us can go with the Adeptus Arbites. Yes, it's pronounced Arbites. Arbites sounds cooler, but whatever. These guys are good for martial characters, and they're basically like the super FBI. And they aesthetically take a lot of inspiration from Judge Dredd in their creation. They also get you some pretty serious starting gear if you're looking to kick some ass right out of the gate. One can also choose to take the Adeptus Astra Telepathica background if they so choose. This is for people interested in building a Psyker character, although it's worth noting that you technically don't have to be a Psyker when you pick this. Pick this if you're trying to build an antisocial freak that pisses everyone else off, but is likely to be the most important person on the team. Players can also go with the Adeptus Mechanicus background. This one's good for picking up some extra knowledge and tech skills, giving you aptitudes so you'll be able to advance said skills quicker as well. They also make it easier for your character to get their hands on cybernetics, as well as giving you some starting Mechanicus implants. There's also the Adeptus Ministorum, more commonly referred to as the Ecclesiarchy. This background gives you access to skills centered around social encounters, specifically charming and commanding others. This background is a good pick for those looking to lead troops or charm the masses, and it makes you better at improving your leadership and social skills. They can also get bigger buffs than usual when using fate points, which are a resource in the game that allow you to affect outcomes due to their faith. Second to last is the other side of the GigaChad coin, the Imperial Guard background. These guys get good buffs to their fighting abilities from their background bonus that allows them to reroll shitty damage rolls with las guns, and they can either take an aptitude for leadership or fieldcraft if they want to be more scouty. Lastly, for backgrounds, we have the Outcast. These are the gangers, beggars, and scum that usually come from the Underhives or some other comparable shithole. They've clawed their way through the mud, and somehow they've ended up in the employ of the Inquisition. While the others may have to advance a long way as acolytes before they feel like they're making it somewhere, these guys are likely already delighted with where they're at. In their eyes, the outcast has already made it far beyond their wildest dreams of being a middle management ganger in some apocalyptically atrocious radioactive shit pile labeled a slum. These guys get bonuses against fatigue, and they can net your character some survival skills or social skills, which in this case tend to be centered around varying degrees of skullduggery. In short, they're good criminals. Those are your basic backgrounds, but they aren't the end of character creation in the game. You also pick a role, which further develops the archetype of your character. Roles are going to essentially be what you'd consider a class in the Dark Heresy system. For a quick rundown of these roles, there's the Assassin, which is all about being sneaky and dealing a lot of damage. They focus on agility a lot for dodging. Chirurgeons, I have no idea how to actually pronounce this, and no, I don't care enough to figure it out, are the medics of Dark Heresy. They help keep your team from dying, which is a very easy thing to do in any of the games in this system. Desperados usually focus on being quick guys that use pistols. They get a special ability that makes them more maneuverable when using pistols, and they are set up to be good at dodging and being quick in general. Hierophants are the party faces, built around being able to use their fellowship skills to their fullest extent. They're good at influencing people. Mystics are pretty simple in concept, at least. They're filthy psychers. Pick this role if you want to have fun combing through the depth of the magic systems in this game, but don't get salty if you roll perils and just accidentally kill yourself when you critically fail. Then there's sages. These are the lore nerds. They're built around knowing as much shit as possible, which is often overlooked in this game by players until they realize that they have no idea what the fuck they're doing, and if they didn't have the Imperial-sanctioned virgin walking around with them, they'd likely be completely confused. These guys are a very interesting support character that'll prove invaluable to any party. There's also Seekers. These guys are the investigators and detectives. They're good at, well, seeking. They're built to ferret people out, pick up trails, and they get abilities that buff their skills in this regard. Lastly, but certainly not least, are the Giga Chad shooters, warriors. Fuck it, we ball. Fuck it, we ball. Big chopper, with the monkey nuts, we stand on business and we step till we fucking die. This guy's all about kicking ass and taking names, and if you don't pick him, you're a bitch. This is all to illustrate that you have an amazing breadth of how you want to build your character, and rather than having to flavor everything in a desperate attempt to mildly differentiate yourself from the other player characters in the group, you can hand tailor your character to play the way you want them, both in RP and in-game mechanics, to allow each and every character at the table to feel unique rather than being a cookie-cutter character. Hell, you could even be the same class and be playing a completely different feeling character with a completely different style of play just by taking different backgrounds or homeworlds. It's actually pretty fucking sick once you wrap your head around it. With all the basics of the characters out of the way, now we can focus on the premise of the game. While it's always the prerogative of the GM, the Dark Heresy core rules sets you in what it calls the Ascalon sector. This is detailed as an amalgamation of systems situated somewhere between the Eye of Terror and the Halo stars. Those of you familiar with the locales I just mentioned don't need much more detail to explain that this place is going to be an absolute hellhole. The book goes on to explain that this place used to be absolutely popping back in the day, but every time things were looking up, someone fumbled the bag and everything went to shit. This seems to have happened a few times, and then the place got a lot shittier with the semi-sentient warp storm in the area known as the Pandemonium. This shitty situation is also compounded by especially entrenched and incompetent nobles whose families all date back to before the Imperium was even around. They constantly make the situation in the system even worse as they start stupid wars and vanity projects that end up killing millions. So it seems that, much like most other aristocrats, the only thing that they're good for is decorating the blade of a guillotine. The warp storm is making everyone all wacky, and preachers are starting to lose their shit and go all doomsday cultist on everyone too. The preeminent world in the Ascalon sector is Juno. This planet has gotten ass blasted countless times by countless different groups, be they rebels, aliens, and wars with their neighbors. And these days, everyone's longing for an imagined past while all being firmly on the doomer train. They think everything's fucked, there's no fixing it, and they might as well give up. This place is run by a bunch of shitty nobles and serves as the capital of the sector. The book gives a good bit of detail about the planet, the people who rule it, how it interacts with the Imperial authorities, its tithe type, the army that protects it and how it operates, the population, the geography, and its trade situation. This section goes into detail about different key characters on each of these planets, and it makes sure to give you some motives for them as well. There's also other planets in the system, such as a hive world called Desolium, that sports a population of roughly 300 billion poor souls, all ruled over by a consortium of oligarchic merchant houses. Overall, there's a ton of information provided on this sector, and it gives a great pre-made setting to throw our players into. This is a great call, because I find the hardest part about running games in this setting and system is the sheer scope of play set before you. You're not just having to come up with one world, but rather many worlds that you would have to spend a metric shit ton of time trying to get together. While the game comes up with random tables to roll on and generate worlds for you to help you bear some of this burden, you're still going to have to put in way much more work in comparison to your normal fantasy setting. That being said, you can feed these systems into an algorithm to handle planet generation for you, but make sure to use it as a baseline and build off of it. This will help a bit with the workload, but it'll still be absolutely bonkers in comparison to running something like D&D. Once you plow through some of the lore of the system and its planets, we finally get to the GM section of the book. This is going to be our handy-dandy notebook as we help our players invariably ruin the setting that these writers have created with love and care. The first subject the book is going to touch on in the GM section is going to be about crafting an Inquisitor. This will be very important in writing. While the players can later go on to become Inquisitors themselves, they are meant to be small-time agents working under an Inquisitor of some sort. While Inquisitors can range wildly in both outlook and methods, this character will serve a crucial function as being the bridge between the GM and the players. This Inquisitor will be able to help direct the efforts of your players to where they can best find the meat and potatoes of the content in our game. Since this game setting has such a large scope, it can be very easy for our players to get lost among all the choices and endless places to go and see. While this can be fun to explore, assuming you have the proper material prepped as a GM to make the place actually feel real, this also means that your players may need a little help being pointed in the right direction of where they can get some fun shit to get involved with. But not only will this Inquisitor be built to serve as the local idiot wrangler, but they will also serve as an integral decision maker that sets the tone of the game, and they'll likely affect the way your PCs decide to approach a problem. The book makes sure to prompt us to think about a few important things while crafting our big scary deep state ghoul. Background. Where did this psychopath come from? Inquisitors can theoretically come from almost any walk of life you can imagine in the Imperium, and deciding their origins will help flesh out how they think about people and how they operate. This may also very well shape their opinions about certain people in the party, certain places, or ideas. What about their motivations? It's important to know what they want and what will make them tick. Maybe they're driven by religious zeal. Maybe they hate incompetent and corrupt officials. Or maybe they're actually secretly corrupt themselves and they're partaking in a staggering amounts of heretical actions that they either post hoc justify or just don't give a shit about because they're actually traitors. Another thing that the book prompts you to think about, that I'm particularly fond of, is what would the Inquisitors sacrifice to accomplish their goals? Would the Inquisitor sacrifice civilians? Probably. Would the Inquisitor sacrifice assets? Probably. Would the Inquisitor sacrifice their acolytes? The players, maybe? Are they willing to do mad heretical shit and therefore sacrifice their very souls? Likely something that would get you killed if you knew the answer to that one. Regardless, I think the book does a really good job at walking you through the process and helping you understand that this will be very important to the campaign you're running. The chapter goes on to prompt you to detail how the Inquisitor might deploy and use the acolytes, and it also asks us to consider how they become an Inquisitor in the first place. There's also a lot of good information in the Game Master chapter detailing how to do quite a few things. It goes into detail about giving some mechanics for the players using the influence of their Inquisitor to accomplish certain goals and to aid their investigations. They give some quick pointers on setting up social encounters. They dedicate some time to giving some solid advice on playing NPCs. And furthermore, it gives examples of how players might be able to use their different social skills, as those can sometimes be a bit more nebulous than shooting someone in the face with a fucking gun. Yada yada yada, so on and so forth. The point is that even though the task ahead of you as a GM of a game like this is going to be an arduous one in comparison to running a simple fantasy game, Fantasy Flight Games goes above and beyond to prepare you for the task set before you, and if you take the time to read through the GM's material, I think you'll come out on the other side thinking it was worth your while. But what about the crunch? Well, I'm glad you asked. why don't we talk a little bit about how this plays mechanically? This game is very, very, very rules dense. It has systems for skills tests, characteristics tests, extended tests, opposed tests, acquiring new gear, acquiring services, character advancement, elite character advancements, psychic powers, including entire tables of effects to roll on based off of the outcomes of your initial rolls to use your powers correctly, different types of actions, along with a ton of different types of attacks that do completely different shit, an injury and critical damage system that has you roll on a separate table corresponding to the type of damage you've taken and what body part you've taken that said type of damage on. A system for uncovering clues to investigations, specific rules for healing that change based off how fucked up you got in combat, a vehicle combat system along with complete sets of stats for different types of vehicles and different rules for how this combat is handled. Repairing vehicles, ship combat, although this is more detailed in an expansion and the Rogue Traders game has more focus on these systems, but by the way, ship combat is fucking ridiculous. There are a plethora of different types of actions that you can take, and many of these courses of actions have their own types of subsystems that have to be followed to determine the specific outcome of the actions that are being taken, including extra piloting actions with full stats for the different types of voidcraft, along with special rules for the different types of ships, which are split into the 3 different types, which are fighters, bombers, and raiding crafts meant for boarding. All of these have their own specific actions with specific rules. It's way too much crunch, and I feel like some designer was just on a massive Adderall binge when they designed this overcomplicated system. And all of this is just to mention a few. Needless to say, this game system is very dense, and I often find the best way to handle it is by striking a balance between the rules that you think are fun and worth your time, and getting rid of the ones that you just find to be annoying to keep track of. Combat can specifically get a bit wieldy in the early to mid game, but it's always pretty damn lethal. Regardless of what level you're at, it's always easy to get yourself killed if you aren't careful. In the early game, it's mostly through crits or bad decisions, but in the late game, you start getting into a gameplay cycle that I like to refer to as rocket tag. This name is to evoke the very violent and explosive nature of combat once everyone involved is very well equipped. Once you get to this stage of the game, you can have PCs one-shotting and getting one-shotted. The system, as previously mentioned, is built around a D100 percentile based system. The skills and characteristics of the characters will actually set the DC for the things that they do, and the GM would adjust their difficulty by stating modifiers to make the checks easier or harder based off of the challenge involved. When it comes to not getting turned into a stain on the ground in this game, gear is just as, if not more important than experience and talent. Combat is mainly focused around 2 steps. Seeing if an attempt to attack the enemy is successful, then seeing how much it hurts the target. The first step is rather self-explanatory. You're rolling an attack and seeing if you succeed. The second step has many factors that affect it. Firstly, weapons have a series of stats and qualities that affect how they work. They have damage, which is always D10 based, and qualities that add extra effects. For example, a weapon with the tearing quality gets to roll damage twice and take the higher result. All weapons have a stat called a pen value. This value represents how much armor this weapon penetrates each time it hits something. This brings us to armor. Characters can wear different types of armor, assuming they have access to the gear and they have the prerequisites to be able to properly use the gear. All armor has an armor value. This armor rating number is taken off of any damage that is taken from attacks. There's also other things you can do like dodging or parrying if you're in melee combat. Successfully doing this negates an attack on you. The problem in the late game is that everyone has weapons that absolutely blast the ever-living fuck out of everything they hit. Melee characters are also absolute freaks that can tear people apart. The point being that armor won't save you, and generally the first guy to get hit is going to eat shit and die real fast in the late game. This means that players essentially get pigeonholed into having a couple of must-take talents and skills that buff your ability to dodge and parry, because eventually the combat devolves into dodge this or die. While some people like myself can find this endearing in a way, if you want to run a Dark Heresy game using your absolutely legitimately sourced Dark Heresy 2nd Edition core rulebook, I would definitely suggest you make sure that your players understand that combat in this game is lethal. This isn't D&D. And you can get absolutely fucking drilled by a child soldier with a glint in his eye that crits you with a las rifle, let alone a roided up demon-possessed freak trying to kill you with a sword that was forged in the fires of hell and quenched in the blood of 1,000,000 orphan virgins. And just make sure they understand what they're getting into, and make sure that they have a backup character ready. And trust me. Anyhow, I'm glad I finally got to do a video about the Fantasy Flight Warhammer 40k games, as these have been near and dear to my heart for a long time. Like I said before, the first TTRPG I ever really played was when I made a World Eater's Berserker for a Black Crusade campaign named Tarthus the Blooded. I've been playing in that game ever since 2016. It's still going on to this day, off and on. Dark Heresy is an absolute treat to the TTRPG space, and I was actually really sad to see how hard it can be for people that might otherwise be interested in playing these games to get the opportunity to enjoy these vibrant games the way that I did. Moreover, Dark Heresy takes a more unique perspective than we're used to on 40k, and I think that's why it shined in popularity above the rest of the games that FFG published for this series. It's so often in the novels that we're focused on the triumphs and battles of Space Marines or great heroes of the Imperium. The stories center around massive campaigns and wars on a scale that we couldn't possibly imagine. And Dark Heresy takes things in a direction that allows us to see the setting from a different perspective. A grimy, noir thriller mystery set in a dystopian future. When it's done right and everything's firing on all cylinders, this game is an absolute gem to play. And as you get stuck into the intrigue, the politics, the lies, the schemes, all building up to the explosive action at the end, you truly find that this game is worth your time. If you have the means to get a hold of this game, and you enjoy the setting, I can't recommend the Fantasy Flight 40k games enough to you. These games are some of the most fun I've ever had playing RPGs, and honestly it saddens me to see just how under the radar these iterations of Warhammer 40k roleplay flew. Hopefully this lecture gives some of you the curiosity to check it out and give the system a try. But I think that about does it for this lecture. I decided to dip my toes into something a bit different than my normal subject matter, but hopefully I can continue to expose all of you to some other systems that might pique your interest and get you interested in exploring the wealth of creativity and possibility that the TTRPG space has to offer outside of just D&D, our beloved. As always, I would like to thank all of my conspirators and acolytes graciously furthering the cause of evil through their contributions to the Evil Defense Fund. You help make this work possible, and together we can work to make the world just a little bit worse for everyone in it. And to you all, thank you for indulging me as we explore new concepts and settings. Hopefully it brought you some small inkling of interest or entertainment. But until next time, this has been your boy Archlich, and remember, in the words of our wise inquisitor, facts are chains that bind perception and fetter the truth.